The rain made soft, steady streaks against the kitchen window, blurring the world outside into shades of gray. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The only sounds were the gentle scratch of a crayon on paper and the heavy ticking of the clock on the wall. 10-year-old Ilara sat at the clean, wooden table, surrounded by a fortress of art supplies. The waxy smell of crayons and the damp scent of the afternoon filled the air. This wasn't a school project. The picture taking shape under her small hands was something else entirely. It was a raw, unspoken feeling given form and color. She worked with a quiet intensity, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then, a sound cut through the quiet, the familiar crunch of tires on the wet gravel driveway. Her mother was home. Ilara's head snapped up. In one swift, practiced motion, she gathered the drawing and her supplies, sliding them into the large drawer of the sideboard. She closed it just as the key turned in the front door lock. The composed, efficient click of heels followed. Eleanor entered the kitchen, shaking a few droplets of rain from her trench coat. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in its order, and then landed on her daughter. Her smile was brief, a quick curve of the lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. Dinner was a quiet affair. Steamed vegetables, baked chicken, everything nutritious and perfectly prepared. Ilara pushed a piece of broccoli around her plate. Eleanor sat across from her, her attention divided between her meal and the financial section of the newspaper spread beside her plate. "How was school?" Eleanor asked, her eyes not leaving a column of numbers. "Fine," Ilara murmured. "Homework done?" "Mente. Almost. 2. Nut." The exchange was a script they both knew by heart. Eleanor nodded, making a small note in the margin of the paper. Ilara watched her mother's hands, the way they moved with purpose and certainty. She watched the way her mother's gaze never truly settled on her, always moving to the next task, the next thing to be managed. The drawing in the drawer seemed to pulse, a secret heart beating just feet away. Ilara's fingers twitched. She imagined pulling it out, sliding it across the smooth tabletop. She pictured her mother's reaction. Would it be confusion? Dismissal? The thought alone made her stomach clench. She lost her nerve, the moment passing as her mother stood to clear the plates. The silence that remained was a heavy, living thing in the room, thick with all the words neither of them knew how to say. It was the silence of a love that provided everything except the one thing that mattered most. Later, after the dishes were dried and put away, and the quiet of the house had deepened with the night, Eleanor moved through the rooms on autopilot. It was her routine. A final check that everything was in its place, a last straightening of a cushion, a quick tidy of Ilara's room before she herself could settle. She smoothed the duvet cover, her hand pausing on the cool cotton. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on a corner of white paper peeking out from under the pillow. It wasn't hidden well. It was almost placed there, a silent offering waiting to be discovered. She pulled it free. It was a drawing, still faintly smelling of wax. The image made her breath catch for a second, a purely physical reaction before her mind could process it. There, under a sky heavy with scribbled gray clouds, was a little girl. The girl was Ilara, unmistakably, with the same flyaway hair and serious eyes. She sat alone on a patch of green, her knees drawn up to her chest. But it was the space beside her that was the true subject of the piece. A large, blank emptiness took up half the page, a void where another figure should have been. The entire composition was a study in muted, sorrowful tones, slate grays, deep navy blues, a mournful purple. Except for one thing. A single, brilliant, sunny yellow streak cut through the gray sky, like a desperate slash of hope. Eleanor's first instinct was to critique. The perspective was off. The proportions of the figure weren't quite right. She assessed it like a report from a junior colleague, looking for errors to correct. But a flicker of something else stirred deep within her, a cold twinge of unease that had nothing to do with artistic technique. She quickly smoothed the feeling down, folding it away. It was just a drawing. Children have big imaginations. She held the paper carefully, its weight feeling all wrong in her hands. She took the drawing downstairs to the kitchen, placing it on the counter under the bright, clinical light of the overhead fixture. The better light revealed everything. Details she had missed in the dim bedroom now screamed at her. A single, glistening silver tear, drawn with careful precision on the cheek of the girl on the paper. And there, in that vast empty space beside her, the faintest ghost of another form, a shape that had been drawn, and then violently, thoroughly erased, leaving only a scar of pressed paper and a faint graphite shadow. Her throat tightened. She looked toward the hallway, toward the stairs that led to her sleeping daughter. The question formed, a solid thing in her mind. She could go up now, gently wake her, sit on the edge of the bed and ask, "Elara, sweetheart, what is this? What were you feeling when you drew this?" The impulse was so strong her foot actually turned toward the doorway, but she stopped. The habit of distance was a stronger force. She wrapped herself in the old, familiar armor. She's just being dramatic. It's a phase. It's probably nothing. The words were a shield, but they felt thin and brittle. She turned back to the counter, picking up the drawing again. The paper felt heavier now, charged with a meaning she was refusing to acknowledge. The perfectly ordered composition of her life, of their life, which she had worked so hard to build and maintain, felt suddenly fragile, like it could shatter if she held this piece of paper for too long. Her eyes were drawn back to that single, incongruous slash of yellow. It was so bold, so defiant in its cheerfulness against the melancholy of the rest. It wasn't just a color. It was a feeling. And that feeling, that specific shade of sunflower yellow, tugged at a thread in her memory, a thread she had tucked away and forgotten years ago. It unraveled slowly at first, then all at once. A park. Sunlight, real and warm, not like the cold kitchen light. The memory was hazy at the edges, but vivid in its center. Elara couldn't have been more than 3, a tiny thing with unsteady legs and a gummy laugh. They were on a blanket that was this exact same shade of bright, impossible yellow. Eleanor could almost feel the cheap, nubby texture of it under her fingers. Elara was giggling, a breathless hiccuping sound as Eleanor tickled her tummy. They were a bubble of joy, just the two of them, and for a moment, everything had felt so simple. The memory was a flash of pure, uncomplicated connection, a moment before the pressures of single motherhood, before the need to be strong hardened into a shell around her. The contrast between that sun-drenched memory and the cold, silent kitchen of the present was a physical blow. The warmth of that long-ago day made the chill in this room feel deliberate, a choice she had made over and over without realizing it. Her professional composure, the careful control she wore like a second skin, began to dissolve at the edges. Her knees felt weak. She pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down heavily, the drawing still clutched in her hand. She wasn't just looking at her daughter's art anymore. She was staring directly into the chasm that had grown between that laughing toddler on the yellow blanket and the lonely girl who now expressed her heartache in gray crayon. The paper in her hand was no longer just paper. It was a verdict, and for the first time she was afraid she knew what it said. The list began in her mind, a familiar recitation she used to quiet any whisper of doubt. It was her shield, her proof of a job well done. A safe home, with a roof that never leaked and heat that always worked. A good school in a good district, with teachers who sent home progress reports she meticulously filed. Clean clothes, always folded and put away. Healthy meals planned a week in advance. She provided structure, stability, the bedrock upon which a successful life was built. These were the things a good mother did. These were the measurable, tangible results. Emotional displays, the messy, complicated work of feelings. That was a luxury. A luxury she couldn't afford when the bills needed paying, when the fear of not being enough for the two of them was a constant cold knot in her stomach. It was easier to be a manager than a mom. A manager could create schedules and checklists. A manager could solve problems with logic and action. A mother had to sit in the uncertainty, to feel the big, scary feelings alongside her child. And she had forgotten how to do that a long time ago. She admitted it to herself then. The truth she had buried under years of busyness. The walls hadn't just appeared. She had built them. Brick by careful brick, she had constructed a fortress around her heart in the raw, aching years after he left. The grief had been too vast, the responsibility too heavy. To feel it all would have been to drown. So she built the walls to keep the floodwaters out, to create a dry, safe space where she could simply function, where she could be the strong one. She had to be the strong one. The crisis had passed. The acute pain had faded into a dull background hum. But the walls had remained. She had never learned how to take them down. She lived inside her fortress, passing supplies over the battlements, lunches made, permission slips signed, scraped knees bandaged. But she never opened the gate. She never came out to play. She never invited her daughter in. The drawing in her hands was not a child's complaint. It wasn't a critique of the meals or the school or the clean clothes. It was a mirror. It was her daughter, holding up a reflection of the emotional landscape Eleanor herself had created. A world of muted gray, of profound loneliness, punctuated only by a desperate, fading hope that the person on the other side of the wall might one day truly see her. The weight of that realization was the weight of every missed bedtime story, every conversation cut short by a work email, every time she had chosen efficiency over connection. It was the crushing weight of years spent building the wrong kind of shelter. The list of her provisions, the sturdy fortress of her logic, began to crumble. It dissolved under the quiet, devastating truth of the drawing. The careful recitation of all she had provided, the safe home, the good school, the clean clothes, now sounded hollow, a meaningless checklist that completely missed the point. She had given everything except the one thing her daughter had truly asked for. Her. A single hot tear welled in the corner of her eye, defying a lifetime of practiced control. It gathered weight, hesitated for a moment on her lower lash, and then fell. It landed with a soft, almost imperceptible splash on the corner of the drawing, right on the edge of the lonely gray sky. The paper drank it in, the moisture blurring the precise line of the horizon, smudging the gray into a softer, more sorrowful shade. That first tear was a breach in the dam. It was followed by another, and then another. They weren't the loud, dramatic sobs of a movie scene. This was something quieter, deeper, and far more real. It was a silent, overwhelming wave of grief that had been held back for a decade. It shook her shoulders and made her chest ache with a pressure she had refused to acknowledge for years. She brought a hand to her mouth, muffling the small, ragged breaths that escaped. She cried for the lost time, for all the sunny afternoons she had spent at her desk instead of on the floor playing. She cried for the distance she had meticulously created, mile by mile, believing it was strength. She cried for the pain in her daughter's eyes that she had seen flicker so many times and had chosen to ignore, dismissing it as childish moodiness. She cried for the memory of the yellow blanket and the realization that she was the one who had let the sun go out. This was the total dissolution of the persona she had worked so hard to maintain. The perfectly composed, eternally capable, cold mother vanished. The armor she wore to meetings and parent-teacher conferences, and even to the dinner table, melted away, leaving only the raw, vulnerable woman underneath. She was just Eleanor, a woman who was terribly, heartbreakingly lonely inside the very walls she had built to protect herself. She folded over the kitchen table, her head resting on her arms, the drawing still trapped under her trembling hands. She didn't try to stop the tears anymore. There were too many of them, a reservoir of unshed emotion, finally finding its way to the surface. She simply let them come, each one a quiet admission of a failure she never meant to happen. Upstairs, the quiet was different. It was the restless quiet of a child who couldn't find sleep. Alara lay in bed, staring at the patterns the streetlight made on her ceiling. The house felt different tonight. The usual comforting sounds of her mother moving efficiently through her evening routines had ended hours ago, replaced by a deep, unnerving silence from downstairs. A thirst, or perhaps a need for a familiar anchor, finally pushed her out of bed. She padded softly down the hallway, her small feet making no sound on the carpet. She reached the bottom step and turned toward the kitchen. And then she froze. The scene before her was one she could never have imagined. Her mother was at the kitchen table, but her head was buried in her arms, her shoulders shaking with a quiet, rhythmic motion that was entirely unfamiliar. And there, on the table in front of her, illuminated by the single overhead light, was the drawing. Her drawing. Ilara's first instinct was a cold spike of fear that shot straight through her. She had been caught. Her secret was out, and it had broken her mother. She had made her mother cry. The urge to retreat was overwhelming, to turn, to flee back up the stairs and hide under her covers, to pretend she had never seen this. She stood rooted to the spot in the darkened hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. But she didn't run. She watched, her fear slowly shifting into a dawning, painful understanding. This wasn't the sharp, angry crying of someone who was upset with her. This was something deeper, sadder. She saw her mother's hand move, not to angrily crumple the paper, but to gently, almost reverently, touch the corner of the drawing, the spot where her own tear had fallen and smudged the gray sky. Her mother wasn't angry. The rigid, composed woman was gone. In her place was someone who was simply hurt. The realization was terrifying and confusing, but it also sparked a tiny, brave flicker of something else inside Alara. A need to comfort the person who was always the comforter. The fear didn't vanish, but it was suddenly outweighed by a deeper pull. The sight of her mother's vulnerability was a language Alara understood far better than cool efficiency. Without a sound, she stepped out of the shadows of the hallway and into the pool of light. She moved slowly, her pajama-clad feet whispering across the cool tile floor. She didn't know what to say. Words felt too big, too clumsy for this fragile moment, so she said nothing. She simply came to a stop beside her mother's chair and stood there, a small, silent sentinel of comfort. She didn't reach out to touch her. She just made her presence known, a quiet offering of solidarity in the middle of the night. Eleanor felt the shift in the air before she saw it. A small change in the light, the faintest hint of movement in her peripheral vision. The crying had subsided into shaky, ragged breaths. She slowly straightened up, her body feeling heavy and spent. She turned her head, and there was Alara. Her daughter's face was pale and worried in the harsh light, her eyes wide with a concern that was far too old for her. There was no instinct to hide, no sudden scramble to wipe her face and rebuild the walls. The energy for that performance was gone, evaporated in the storm of her tears. Her face was raw, streaked and puffy, her eyes red-rimmed. She was completely exposed, and for the first time she made no move to cover it up. She just looked at her daughter, her expression an open wound of regret and sadness. The image was a profound reversal of their usual roles. The emotionally fluent child, brave enough to offer silent comfort, standing beside the emotionally paralyzed adult who had finally been rendered speechless. The space between them, usually filled with unspoken rules and careful distance, now held only the quiet, shared truth of the drawing on the table between them. It was the end of one way of being, and the terrifying, hopeful beginning of another. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the quiet kitchen, the space between them filled with everything that had been left unsaid for years. Then, Eleanor's breath hitched. She reached out, her movement slow and deliberate, and pulled Alara into her arms. It wasn't their usual quick, efficient hug. She held her daughter tightly, so tightly, as if she could press all the missed embraces from the last few years into this single moment. Alara's small frame felt fragile against her, and she buried her face in her daughter's hair, breathing in the simple, clean scent of her. When she finally pulled back, her hands came up to cradle Alara's face, her thumbs gently wiping at a stray tear that had escaped down her own cheek. Her voice, when it came, was thick and raspy from crying, stripped bare of all its usual crispness. "Alara, sweetheart," she whispered, the term of endearment feeling both foreign and desperately needed on her tongue. She glanced down at the drawing, then back into her daughter's worried eyes. "What is this? Please, tell me. What is this picture?" Ilara's gaze dropped to the table. She twisted the hem of her pajama shirt in her small hands, her courage wavering now that she was put on the spot. But her mother's raw vulnerability gave her strength. She took a shaky breath and began to speak in a voice so soft it was almost carried away by the hum of the refrigerator. "That's me," she said, pointing a tentative finger at the small figure under the gray sky. The gray is the quiet. The quiet in the car, the quiet at dinner, the quiet in the house when you're working. It's the lonely feeling." Her finger moved to the vast, empty space that dominated the page. And that's the empty space. For the dad I don't remember. But also, she hesitated, her voice dropping even lower. For you. Sometimes it feels like you're there, but you're not really there. You're somewhere else. Then her finger found the one spot of vibrant color, tracing the bold yellow streak. "And that," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength, a tiny thread of hope. "That's the hope that maybe one day you'll look up from your computer and really see me again. Like you used to." Eleanor listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer a solution or try to explain it away. She simply absorbed her daughter's words, letting each one land, each one carve a little deeper into her heart. She heard the profound loneliness in the description of the gray, the aching absence in the empty space, the heartbreaking resilience in the yellow streak of hope. She was truly listening, perhaps for the first time in years, without any defense or deflection. When Alara finished, the kitchen was silent again, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer a wall between them. It was a shared space, heavy with truth. Eleanor looked from her daughter's earnest, worried face to the devastatingly honest art she had created. The apology that rose in her throat wasn't the quick, "I'm sorry," she used when she forgot to buy a specific snack. This was something that came from a place so deep, it hurt. "Ilara," she began, her voice trembling with the weight of it. "I am so sorry." She took another breath, forcing herself to be specific, to make the apology mean something. "I am sorry for being so distant. I am sorry for making you feel like you were alone in this house. I am sorry for all the times I was looking at a screen when I should have been looking at you. You tried to show me, and I wasn't seeing it. I am so sorry for my coldness." The words hung in the air, a stark, honest admission that began to dissolve the last of the ice that had frozen between them. It was the first fragile step across the bridge her daughter had built with a piece of paper and a box of crayons. Eleanor's apology hung in the air, a fragile, living thing between them. She kept her hands on Alara's shoulders, needing the physical connection to ground herself. How could she possibly explain a decade of self-protection to a 10-year-old? The words felt too big, too complicated. She had to find a way her daughter could understand. She took a slow breath. When your dad left," she began, the words still unfamiliar and painful. "It felt like a big, scary storm had blown our house down, and I was so afraid. I had to be strong for both of us. I had to build a new house, all by myself." She looked around their tidy, sterile kitchen. "I built us this house. I made sure it was safe. I made sure the roof didn't leak." She brought a hand to her own chest, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But I think I built a fortress around my heart, too. Big, strong walls to keep the scary feelings out, to keep the sad out. I thought that's what being strong meant. I had to be the strong one." Her eyes welled with fresh tears, but she didn't look away from Alara's intent gaze. "The problem is, I built the walls so high and so strong, I didn't know how to take them down. Even when the storm was over. Even when I wanted to come out and play. I was stuck inside, just passing things over the wall. I could give you lunch and help with homework, but I couldn't give you me. I'm so sorry I forgot how." Ilara listened, her small face a mask of solemn concentration. She processed her mother's metaphor of forts and storms, her child's mind translating the adult pain into something she could grasp. She didn't offer a grand speech. Instead, she reached out and placed her small hand over her mother's heart, right where Eleanor had indicated her own walls were. "You don't have to be the strong one all by yourself," Alara said, her voice clear and quiet in the hushed kitchen. "We can be strong together. The walls can have a door." The simple, profound wisdom of it shattered the last of Eleanor's defenses. It wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation. A solution she had been too blind and too frightened to see. Her daughter wasn't asking her to dismantle her fortress alone. She was asking to be led inside. The conversation that followed was halting, filled with pauses and more tears. But it was utterly, beautifully authentic. For the first time, they were not manager and child. They were just two people, sitting in the wreckage of their distance, starting the messy, uncertain work of building a door. After a while, the raw emotion began to settle into a weary, shared calm. Their hands were still linked on the tabletop, resting beside the drawing. Eleanor looked down at it again. The image hadn't changed, but its meaning had been completely transformed. The gray sky was no longer a judgment of her failure. It was an honest record of her daughter's loneliness, a feeling she now understood and shared. The empty space was a shared loss, not just an absence. And the yellow streak. Eleanor's finger, trembling slightly, came to rest on that bold slash of color.
This,
She said, her voice firmer now, filled with a new kind of conviction.
this is us now.
This is this moment, right here. This is the door. Ilara looked from her mother's face to the yellow streak, and a small, real smile touched her lips for the first time that night. It was a smile of understanding. We should keep it, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. Not because it's a perfect drawing, but because it's an important memory. Maybe the most important one. The thought of filing it away in a drawer or a box felt wrong now. That was where secrets and hurts belonged, and this was no longer either of those things. Ilara nodded, her eyes shining. We can put it in a frame. Yes, Eleanor agreed, squeezing her hand. We'll frame it. So we never forget this night. We'll never forget the promise we made to really see each other. The piece of paper was no longer a document of their sadness. It was a testament. It was the bridge they had both just crossed, meeting in the middle, and the map for the new territory they were entering together. It was proof that a single, honest conversation could change the color of everything. The morning light that filtered through the kitchen window was different. It was the same sun, the same window, but the quality of the light seemed warmer, softer, as if the world itself had been gently remade overnight. The routine was the same, the clatter of cereal bowls, the pouring of orange juice, but the feeling in the air was entirely new. It was lighter, as if a heavy blanket had been lifted from the house. Eleanor moved through the kitchen, not with her usual brisk, task-oriented efficiency, but with a new awareness. Her eyes sought out Ilara, and when they found her, they held her gaze. A real smile, one that crinkled the corners of her eyes, appeared on Eleanor's face. It wasn't the quick, distracted smile of before. It was a smile of seeing, of truly recognizing the person in front of her. Ilara, tentative at first, smiled back. It was a little shy, but it was genuine, less forced than any expression she'd offered in months. Instead of the usual whole wheat toast and yogurt, Eleanor pulled a mixing bowl from the cupboard. I thought we might have pancakes, she said, her voice casual, as if it were the most ordinary suggestion in the world. It was a small break from the healthy, perfectly managed routine. It was an act of grace, just because. As she stirred the batter, she nodded toward the window over the sink. Look, a cardinal. He's been visiting that branch all week. They stood together for a moment, watching the flash of red against the green leaves, talking about the bird, about a book Ilara was reading, about nothing of great importance, and everything that mattered. The conversation was easy. It flowed. It was filled with a genuine interest that had been missing for so long. Later, as Ilara was recounting a story about her friend at school, Eleanor's hand instinctively drifted toward her phone, lighting up with a new email notification. She saw the movement from the corner of her eye, saw the familiar flicker of hesitation cross her daughter's face. The story, beginning to trail off. This time, Eleanor stopped. She looked at the phone, then back at Ilara. With a deliberate motion, she picked it up, pressed the button on the side to darken the screen, and set it face down on the counter, out of reach. It was a small, silent promise. "I'm listening," she said softly. "Tell me the rest." Ilara's face lit up, and she finished her story with renewed enthusiasm. The simple act of being fully seen, of having her mother's undivided attention, was a gift more valuable than any toy or treat. As they cleared the breakfast dishes, Eleanor leaned against the counter. "This Saturday," she began, "let's do something. Just you and me. No agenda, no errands. We could just go somewhere. The park, maybe, or that little bookstore you like. Whatever you want." The promise wasn't a grand, expensive vacation. It was specific in its simplicity and heartfelt in its intention. It was a block of time, carved out and protected, with the sole purpose of connection. Ilara's expression shifted from hopeful to something more solid, a cautious, palpable optimism. It was the look of a child who has been given a key and is starting to believe the door might actually open. She nodded, a single, solemn dip of her chin. "I'd like that." It was the first step, consciously taken, on a new path they would now walk together. At the office later that day, Eleanor sat at her desk, the hum of her computer a dull background noise. Her hand rested on the mouse, but her attention was elsewhere, drawn to the small silver frame at the corner of her blotter. It held a school photo of Ilara from last year, a picture she'd chosen because her daughter looked neat and proper, a testament to her own good management. She'd always seen it as proof of a job well done, a well-cared-for child in a well-ordered life. But today, she didn't see the tidy hair or the polite smile. She saw the eyes. She looked past the composition and into the expression, and for the first time, she wondered what her daughter had been feeling the moment that shutter clicked. Was she happy? Was she just performing for the camera? Was there a loneliness behind that smile that Eleanor had been too busy to notice? The polished surface of professional success, the clean lines of her career, suddenly felt flat and meaningless. A new metric for achievement was quietly writing itself in her mind, one based not on quarterly reports, but on the quality of the light in her daughter's eyes. Her hand moved from the mouse to her office phone. It was a simple black handset, a tool for closing deals and managing projects. At precisely 12:17 p.m., she picked it up and dialed her own home number, her heart doing a funny little skip in her chest. It was her lunch break. She'd never done this before. The phone rang twice before Ilara's small, tentative voice answered. "Hello?"
"Hi, sweetheart."
"It's me," Eleanor said, her own voice softer than it ever was at work. "I was just thinking about you. How's your day going?" There was a pause on the other end, a beat of pure, stunned silence. Then, a warmth flooded Ilara's voice, a tone of delighted disbelief. "You called?" "My day is good. I'm drawing again." The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. They talked about nothing of consequence, a cartoon she'd watched, the sandwich Eleanor was eating. But the simplicity of the act felt momentous for both of them. For Eleanor, it was the first conscious choice to prioritize presence over productivity. For Ilara, it was a tangible thread connecting her to her mother in the middle of the day. A yellow streak of connection, cutting through the ordinary gray. When she hung up, the photo on her desk didn't look like proof anymore. It looked like a person. And her most important work was no longer on the screen in front of her. That first phone call, that first planned Saturday, the framed drawing on the wall, they were not a conclusion. they were a beginning. The story of a relationship healing is never a straight line from broken to fixed. It is a path walked one deliberate step at a time, with its share of stumbles and wrong turns. Some days were easy. The connection felt natural, the conversations flowed, and the new warmth in the house felt as permanent as the sunrise. But other days, the old habits were waiting, patient and familiar. There were evenings when the weight of work felt crushing, and Eleanor would catch herself retreating behind her eyes, her responses to Alara becoming short and automatic again. There were moments when Alara, stung by a forgotten promise or a distracted glance, would withdraw, the shutters coming down over her own expressive face. The distance would yawn open again, familiar and cold. The difference now was the acknowledgement. The silence was no longer a default state. It was a signal. One of them would eventually name it. Eleanor might sigh, put down her phone, and say, "I'm sorry. I went away for a minute there, didn't I?" Or Alara might ask, quietly, "Are you okay? You seem far away." They had created a new language, and its most important word was a gentle course correction. They had learned to see the stumble not as a failure that meant the whole endeavor was doomed, but as a natural part of the journey. The goal was not a state of perfect, constant harmony. That was a fantasy. The goal was the courage to be vulnerable enough to say, "I'm struggling," and to trust that the other person would help you find your way back. It was the courage to keep choosing each other, again and again, even on the hard days. It was the understanding that the fortress walls she had built over a decade wouldn't vanish overnight. But now, they were building a door together. And some days, just remembering to open it was the entire victory. The focus shifted from a desperate need for a perfect resolution to a quiet celebration of small, hard-won progress. The journey, with all its imperfections, was the entire point. The frame was simple, a plain wooden border that didn't distract from what was inside. They hung it together on the living room wall, not tucked away in a hallway or a bedroom, but right there in the heart of the home, where everyone could see it. To any visitor, it was just a child's drawing, a little uneven, emotionally expressive, but technically unremarkable. They might compliment it politely and move on, never knowing its true weight. But for the two of them, it was a landmark, a fixed point on their new emotional map. Every time Eleanor passed it, her eyes would find that single yellow streak cutting through the gray. It was a daily reminder of the promise made in the quiet of the kitchen, a vow to see and to be seen, to stay present, even when it was hard. For Alara, it was a quiet testament to her own courage. It proved that speaking a painful truth, even without words, could change everything. It was no longer a document of their sadness, but a monument to their willingness to try. The paper behind the glass held the memory of the night the walls began to come down, a permanent, gentle encouragement to keep building the door. We often think love is a language of provision, a checklist of things given, a roof, a meal, a safe ride to school. We speak it through action and responsibility, believing that if we check every box, the message will be received. But children, they speak a different dialect. Theirs is the language of presence. They don't articulate their needs in memos and bullet points. They speak through their art, in the stories they tell their toys, in the quiet way they hover near you when they need reassurance. They hold up mirrors made of crayon and clay, showing us the emotional world we've co-created with them. The real work, the most courageous work, is learning to listen to that language. It takes immense bravery for a parent to look into that mirror, to quiet the voice that rationalizes and justifies, and to truly see the reflection staring back. It means setting down the weight of your own defenses and choosing vulnerability over control. It's acknowledging that building a secure attachment isn't about constructing a perfect life, but about fostering a real connection. It is beautiful, it is messy, and it is a choice you make over and over. To listen, to really listen, to the heart speaking through the art.